Ah, the arcades. The very word brings back memories of dumping quarter after quarter into these beautiful looking cabinets covered with fantastic art and filled with technology that was more advanced than the 16-bit consoles I possessed at home. Some of the most famous genres in the 90s included racers and beat-em-ups, but the one classic game that really took off during this time was the fighting game. Street Fighter II took the genre to a new level at which others would copycat for many years following the game's release. Other games like Mortal Kombat became infamous for adding innovative features like blood and gore. The fighting game is great because really anybody can pick them up and play them for a few minutes or even hours, from button mashers to outright expert veterans of the genre. I wanted to showcase some fighters that maybe not everybody knows about. We won't be going over games like Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat, or even Fatal Fury, King of Fighters, or Samurai Showdown. Now, hardcore fighting game fans might know most of these games, but even I just recently played some of these for the first time, and I consider myself a pretty big fan of these types of games. Anyway, let's not waste any more time, let's take a look at some games. Aggressors of Dark Combat was released in 1994 and was a collaboration between ADK and SNK. The most unique aspect of the game is the fact that, unlike most fighters, you don't use the up button to jump, since you can move back and forth between the background and foreground, similar to a beat-em-up. This leads to a different style of control layout, using only 2 attack buttons and 1 for jump. And while there are only 2 attack buttons, both of them have different levels of attack. For example, if you tap the punch button, your fighter will perform a light punch, but if you continue to press the button, it will turn into a strong punch. Again, this kind of feels similar to something we'd see in a beat-em-up. While the fighting system is pretty simple, it just doesn't feel that great. It's kind of hard to get used to. I constantly find myself pressing up to jump. Not only that, but special moves can often become difficult to pull off. In fact, the game in general is pretty difficult. It's definitely one to master, as first-time players might have some issues advancing. There are also some weapons present in the game, and these are thrown into the action by onlookers. Again, kind of reminds me of a beat-em-up. Matches only consist of 1 round, but due to the multiple stages of health, these fights can last a considerable amount of time. There are also super moves called crazy attacks, but for the life of me, I still can't seem to pull one off. While there are only 8 players to choose from, I do like the variety given to us, and Kotaro Fuma from World Heroes makes an appearance in the game as a playable character. One thing I really enjoy about this title is the visual presentation. I think this game looks great. The character sprites are nice and large, the backgrounds are very detailed and colorful, and features a good amount of movement. Graphically, this is everything I could have wanted in a fighting game as a kid in the early 90s. This game was actually awarded the Strangest Game of the Year by EGM in 1994. It's safe to say it wasn't hugely popular, but nevertheless, I still enjoy giving this one a few rounds every now and then.
You lose.
1996 gave us a little gem called Breakers. This game was actually first announced in 1993 under the name Crystal Legacy, but throughout the next few years the game was revamped and renamed. There aren't a whole lot of fighters to choose from here, only 8, but I feel like there's a nice variety. Everybody has his or her own unique persona. The control scheme is a pretty typical 4-button layout featuring 2 punches and 2 kicks. The gameplay is definitely where this game shines. It's really smooth and responsive, and honestly, it feels like I'm playing on the Street Fighter game engine, right down to the special move commands. There's also super moves that can be performed after filling a meter located at the bottom of the screen, and pulling these moves off are actually quite easy. That's one of my favorite parts of this game, the fact that moves are easily pulled off, and you're not stuck standing there like a fool blowing attempt after attempt at a simple fireball. I really like the large character sprites and the art style, but I am a little disappointed in the dull color palette and how some of the backgrounds look a little more like a painting than an actual location. But honestly, this game plays so well, it really doesn't matter what it looks like. In 1998, we saw Breaker's Revenge, which is a sequel straight out of Street Fighter's handbook. I mean, they simply added one more playable character and tuned gameplay ever so slightly. They did also redesign the on-screen HUD, but really, this game is more of a remix than a sequel. Overall, the Breaker series is quite high in my book, and I really recommend it to any fighting game fans that haven't yet played it. By 1995, the Double Dragon series had seen it all. I mean, multiple arcade and console releases and even a movie based on the franchise. Then there was the game based on the movie that was based on the game. You know, think Street Fighter the movie, the game. It was simply titled Double Dragon, which, isn't confusing at all, and was released on multiple home platforms, but first saw an arcade release in 1995. While most Double Dragon games are beat-em-ups, they decided to go with a fighting game here like they did with the Shadow Falls. The button layout is a little different than your standard fighter. There are 2 strong and 2 weak attacks, but neither of them are specific to punches or kicks. It really just depends on the fighter you choose. And speaking of fighters, there are 10 to choose from. Each fighter's special moves are actually displayed under their picture on the character select screen, but these moves are all very standard regardless, so if you've ever played Street Fighter, chances are you'll figure out each fighter's moves in no time at all. There's a charge meter that grants you the ability to perform a super move when it's filled, and this fills faster when your fighter is low on health. The gameplay here is actually pretty good. I really don't have any complaints. The game wasn't received well by critics, as most people felt the graphics were inferior compared to other fighters at the time. I actually like the way this game looks. I mean, the fighters look good, detailed, the scaling is really cool, but I have to admit the backgrounds are kind of hit or miss. I mean, certain stages just lack color and detail, while others, like this one, look fantastic. I think another area this game excels is the sound. The music is a bit repetitive, but man, some of these tracks are really good.
Round 2, fight!
I also really like the inclusion of day and night cycles in fighting games. This was one of those games I had only seen in magazines as a kid, and I didn't get to play it until my late teens. But regardless of what other people think about Double Dragon, I actually really enjoy this game.
Billy, win!
In 2002, Rage of the Dragons was released. Now, this was originally intended to be a sequel to Double Dragon, but the game designer was unable to acquire the rights, so instead it's more of a tribute to the series. By the late 90s and early 2000s, tag team fighters were becoming all the rage, so it's no surprise that games like this were going in that direction. With 14 fighters to choose from, there's definitely somebody here for everybody. Even Billy and Jimmy are here. Well, kind of. Instead of their last name being Lee, it's Lewis. But we get what they were trying to do and what they were actually allowed to do. After you select your 2 fighters, you'll find 4 attack buttons, 2 punches and 2 kicks. On top of that are some advanced maneuvers like the ability to evade moves and initiate combo sequences. You can also tag in and out of battle by pressing the B and C buttons together. And while one character is actively fighting, the other can regenerate his or her health. Super moves had become pretty standard by this point in the genre and are featured here as well. The gameplay is extremely polished here. It feels really satisfying. And visually, this game looks really good, and it should, seeing as it was released in 2002. The level designs are all very detailed, and each stage can actually be extended a few feet on each side by breaking through barriers. Though I don't care much for the dance-style music present here, the other music in the game is great. This is definitely a fantastic fighter, and I would have really liked to see it with the Double Dragon license, but either way, this is one worth putting a few hours of your time into. Fight Fever hit arcades in 1994, and if both the presentation and style look a bit familiar, well, that's because the game runs on the original Art of Fighting game engine. There are 8 characters to choose from, and really, none of them jump off the page at me. Despite having very different appearances, they all still feel kind of generic to me. The main problem with the game lies in the level of difficulty. Like Art of Fighting, this game will really dish it out. I mean, like, brutally, cheaply make you feel like an utter worthless human being. Anytime I beat somebody here, I felt like it was pretty much mostly luck. The attacks are extremely repetitive, I mean, just cheap. Now, I'm sure there are people that are really good at this game and they probably think I just suck at it, which may be correct, but I'm usually pretty good at fighters. I just can't seem to figure this one out. Other than the difficulty, it plays alright. The button layout and special moves are pretty standard. I like the use of larger sprites, and a lot of the backgrounds look really good with multiple layers of scrolling. But I think most of all, this game just feels like a knockoff. I mean, I know Fighter's history was the ultimate Street Fighter knockoff, but come on. I mean, this guy just looks like Ken, and this is just Guile's stage with a helicopter instead of a jet. I included this game because regardless of how hard it is or how cheesy it is, it's still a solid 90s fighter, and believe it or not, I still kind of find it enjoyable. Okay, now I know I said I wouldn't include any of the Fatal Fury games here, but a lot of people don't know about this one. I first played it on the Dreamcast back in the early 2000s, but it was released in the arcades in late 1999. Garou Mark of the Wolves takes place in Southtown 10 years after the death of Geese Howard. The only returning fighter from the original series is Terry Bogard. This time he's ditched his infamous red hat and jacket and now sports a brown jacket. Some of the other fighters are offspring of previous Fatal Fury characters like Rock Howard, who is in fact the son of Geese Howard. And like Art of Fighting 3, this game feels quite detached from its predecessor, including the removal of the two-plane system that we've seen in most of the games in the series. There are also some new features like the Tactical Offense Position, or TOP. This splits the health bar into thirds, letting you select a section in which your player is most powerful and can recover his or her health. The Just Defense system that would later become popular in the Capcom vs. SNK games debuted here. This feature rewards a player for defending an attack with a small amount of health and the ability to quickly attack back. The gameplay feels like absolute perfection in my opinion. I mean, there's nothing I could imagine changing here. It's just a more refined, polished version of what we've seen in the series in the past. Visually, the game is just stunning. The characters look really good, but man, some of these backgrounds just really draw you in. I think the importance of a good stage design is sometimes overlooked in a fighting game. But the game doesn't just look good, it's easy on the ears as well. There is some really good music in this game. This is hands down one of my favorite fighting games of all time. I have some great memories playing it when I was a teenager and still very much enjoy it to this day. This is one of those games that every fighting game should play at least once in their lifetime. In 1993, Fighter's History was released by Data East in the arcades. This didn't come without controversy though, as Capcom felt this game was a little too close to their franchise fighting game, Street Fighter II. Capcom sued Data East but was unsuccessful in court, and Data East walked away only to make a sequel to the game that caused so much controversy. Fighter's History Dynamite was released in 1994 and still has that infamous Street Fighter feel to it. The main difference is, unlike Street Fighter II's 6-button layout, this game features the more common 4-button layout. The game engine is pretty sound. I mean, this game plays well. I'm surprised the series didn't become more popular in the 90s. It is a bit on the difficult side, but the challenge doesn't feel unrealistic. The game also looks very good, with a lot of great colorful backgrounds, and one feature that I absolutely love is the day and night versions of these stages. I love when the time of day changes between rounds. I've always been a big fan of this. The sound is also very solid. I mean, listen to this scream. I had the first Fighter's History for the SNES when I was a kid, and I got a lot of enjoyment out of it. Unfortunately, I never owned this version growing up. It did see a home console release in 1994 on the Neo Geo, which I didn't own. It was also released 3 years later in 1997 on the Sega Saturn, which I did have, but it was only released in Japan. If you get the chance to check out Fighter's History Dynamite, you definitely should. In 1995, SNK released Savage Rain, a weapon-based fighter that takes place in a futuristic version of the city Southtown, which had been used for other SNK titles such as Fatal Fury and Art of Fighting. The 10 fighters here to choose from are all pretty unique to say the least. There's a crazed clown, 2 ninjas, a morbidly obese cop whose jacket is like 4 sizes too small. I mean, they really went all out here. Unlike Samurai Showdown, you can also throw your weapon as well as use it for melee attacks. And to throw your weapon, you just press B and C together at the same time. There's also 2 planes to do battle in, similar to Fatal Fury, but they're not always background and foreground. Sometimes they might simply be upper and lower sections of the stage. Savage Rain is definitely a nice looking game. Everything is very colorful and kind of has a bit of a comic book feel to it. Not only is the scaling really smooth here, but it's very necessary as these stages can get pretty massive. And no detail was spared in the creation of these levels. There's so much going on that they can almost get distracting, but I like that. In 1996, the sequel to Savage Rain was born. At first glance, it almost looks like a remix title, but a lot more has changed than you might first assume, including the name. It's known now as Kazuna Encounter. Once again, there are 10 fighters to choose from, and almost all of them appeared in the first title. The main difference here is that you must select 2 characters, as this game now uses a tag team format. To tag your fighter in and out of battle, simply stand in the tag zone and press the D button. With this new tag team format, there are no longer multiple lines in which to fight in. Another change is that you can no longer throw a weapon by pressing the 2-button combo from the first game, but certain fighters still have special attacks in which they throw their weapons. The base of the game engine hasn't changed, but the minor tweaks have definitely made the game flow a little better, and the combo system is extremely satisfying. The game's graphics haven't changed much either. The fighters got a color swap, and the backgrounds have been designed, but that's about it. And while I do like the new stage designs, I don't like the fact that the levels are no longer fighter specific, which means levels can become repetitive. This is definitely not my favorite series in the SNK lineup, but it's one that brought me enjoyment. I had this fighting game on the Super Nintendo when I was a kid called Power Instinct. To me, it took a total back seat to games like Street Fighter and Fatal Fury, but I still enjoyed it here and there. The arcade version of the game, which was released in 1993, is a lot better than the SNES port in my opinion. I mean, duh, right? I remember always thinking the game never took itself too seriously, as one of the fighters is an old woman. Control-wise, it plays fine, and honestly, it's kind of fun, but the dull colors and the not-so-memorable characters just kind of turned me off from the series. That is until 10 years and a few sequels later. Matra Melee was released in 2003, and man is this one solid fighter. Right off the bat, you'll notice the large list of fighters to choose from. There's definitely something here for everybody. There's even a few fighters from the Rage of the Dragons here. The button layout consists of 2 kicks and 2 punches, along with some advanced moves for maneuvers like evading enemy attack. You could really feel how polished 2D fighters had become by the early 2000s. This has got to be one of the best feeling game engines I've played on outside of the Street Fighter series. Special moves are easy to pull off, and the little extras like the ability to double jump and dash attack are extremely welcome features. The series still has that goofy, we don't take ourselves too seriously feel to it, but it just works better here in my opinion as the art style matches the attitude. Everything is very colorful and overly animated. Not only do the fighters look amazing, but so do the backgrounds. I mean, some of the details have me checking out the backgrounds more than the fight at times. The game can be challenging, but not ridiculously hard like some other arcade fighters. Matra Melee actually has me rethinking my overall opinion of the Power Instinct series. If you get the chance, check this one out for sure. Ninja Masters is another weapon-based fighter released in 1996 and developed by ADK, the same people who brought us games like World Heroes and Aggressors of Dark Kombat, and this would actually be the last fighter that the company made. The first impression most people might get from this game is Samurai Showdown clone, and that's understandable. One big difference is the ability to fight with or without your weapon, which is really cool and even changes the way special moves are performed depending on if you have your weapon drawn or not. A player's weapon can also be dropped in the heat of battle, at which point the player can pick his or her weapon back up. Because of this, weapons sometimes blink or flash when they're at risk of being dropped. The game engine is a well-designed one, and I really can't find anything I don't like about it. It's responsive, moves are easy to perform, and you can quickly switch from armed to unarmed by pressing B and C together. The game was often judged because of its dated graphics, but I don't really see it. I mean, I know the fighters are a bit on the smaller side, but I love the art style and the detail put into each character. Also, some of the backgrounds feature some pretty nice looking water effects. Ninja Masters is a fun game, but falls a little into the simple side, which is fine with me when I'm just looking to kill 20 minutes or so. If you do like Samurai Showdown, check this one out. And speaking of Samurai Showdown, The Last Blade has often been referred to as the spiritual successor to the series. It hit arcades in December of 1997 and featured a plot inspired by ancient Japanese mythology. The gameplay is unique as a lot of emphasis is put into defending attacks. While the first 3 buttons are used for weapon strikes and kicks, the remaining button is a repel maneuver, and when it's timed right will block an enemy's offense and leave your opponent vulnerable to attack. I don't use this feature as much as I probably should because I'm mainly focused on pulling off moves, but it's cool to see something like this work so smoothly. There are also 2 fighting styles that you can select from. Speed mode allows the fighter to pull off speed combos, while power mode grants the player the ability to inflict more damage. The gameplay is definitely as good as Samurai Showdown. I wouldn't really say it's better, but it's right up there with it, and that's for sure. As you can see, I really don't have to tell you how good this game looks. It really speaks for itself. I played this game for the first time in the early 2000s as a buddy of mine imported it for the PlayStation, and I really couldn't understand why we never saw an American console release. Well, it was released on the Neo Geo Pocket Color, but I never owned one of those. The sequel, The Last Blade 2, did see a North American release on the Dreamcast in 2000, but the first release was in the arcades in 1998. The original lineup of 12 fighters has been boosted up to 16, giving players plenty of variety. The gameplay hasn't really changed, and that's honestly a good thing. There wasn't anything that needed to change. But having said that, the game does feel a little more difficult, sometimes a little too difficult. When I say some of these stage designs are impressive, I mean, man, these are really impressive, like here where you're fighting in a building that's totally engulfed in flames. Or here how you can hear the wind blowing through the weeds and actually see what I believe are dragonflies just freely moving around the background. This adds a lot of life to the game in my opinion. Samurai Showdown was a darker series, but man, is this a good couple of games. Like I mentioned, the second title was released on the Dreamcast, so pick it up if you spot it and if it's not going to break the bank. In the 90s, Sunsoft had a few fighting games under their belt, but they weren't exactly known for specializing in the genre. In 1996, they released Waku Waku 7, and if the name sounds a bit bizarre to you, well, it fits the game's crazy style. There aren't a lot of fighters to choose from, but I promise they're the most diverse group of fighters we've seen on this list. I honestly can't tell you what's going on here with some of these characters. It's just absolutely wild. Along with a standard 4-button layout, there are some other cool maneuvers like being able to dash attack your opponent. I find this to be very addictive and find myself doing it often. Another thing I found very unique to a 2D fighter is the ability to attack a downed opponent. Special moves are also very standard and are pulled off with the greatest of ease. In fact, each fighter's move list is displayed in the character select screen. And how can you have a good fighting game without super moves? This is one of those fighters where there is just so much going on during a fight that it can almost become overwhelming, mostly because you're sitting there trying to figure out what you're looking at. Like, is this an umbrella coming out of a girl's butt? And I know I've mentioned this before, but I can't stress how much I love a day and night cycle in fighting games. This should be mandatory. It just looks really cool, and a lot of it has to do with the stage designs. They put a lot of time and effort into the levels, and it shows. They decided to go with the scaling effects that so many SNK fighters had at the time, and I for one have always liked this feature as it allows for larger stage designs. Musically, this game is just as wacky as everything else, and it even saw a soundtrack release in Japan. To me, the music fits, but isn't enough for me to want to listen to it outside of the game. Of course, this game never saw a North American home release. I mean, why would they do us that favor, right? This is definitely a sleeper, a true meaning of the term hidden gem, and if you get the chance, definitely give this one at least a few rounds. Well, that's it for now. I just love fighting games, and there were even more I wanted to include here, but I had to stop myself somewhere. Maybe I'll make a sequel to this video if you guys show some interest in one. Until next time, thanks for watching.